the elitists in our society get to determine exactly how we ought to view questions of race. And this has become implicit in the Democratic Party agenda. It's not just elitist views of COVID, where the rules don't apply to them. If you're a Democratic politician, the rules don't apply to you either. So if you're Joe Biden, you could be called a racist by Kamala Harris a year ago, and now you're a leader on racial justice issues. How? Well, you just declared that America is systemically racist, and now you are dedicated to fighting that systemic racism. Now, as I have pointed out, the shift in definition from racism to systemic racism is wrong, stupid, and ugly. Okay, racism was originally defined as the belief in the inferiority or superiority of a group of people based on race. That was the definition of racism. And you could tell a racist policy if it distinguished based on race. You could tell a racist if a racist did a racist thing. But then, in the 1960s, the definition of race shifted, and racism particularly shifted. Stokely Carmichael, who became the head of the Black Panther Party, Stokely Carmichael, originally one of the heads of another prominent civil rights organization, and then he became radicalized. He redefined racism. He said that racism actually was any system that creates inequality. And this is exactly the argument that is made today. See, I don't think the American people understand what definitional shift has happened here. I think that the American people look at phrases and they identify the word they understand, and then they forget the modifier. So you see this happen with social justice. People say, yeah, I'm for social justice. And what they think they mean is they are just for justice. They don't understand that the word social has now modified the word justice. So justice, when most people think about it, justice is just about an individual getting what they deserve. Social justice is about a group getting what the quote-unquote group deserves in spite of what the individual actually deserves. So social justice is actually in many ways the opposite of individual justice. The same thing is true of racial justice or environmental justice. Whenever you add a modifier to justice, what you're actually doing is shifting the definition from an inherently individual definition of justice to another definition of justice that implicitly condones injustice against individuals. Okay, the same thing happens when you're talking about racism. So racism is bad, right? Racism is wrong because racism, again, is defined as the belief in the inferiority or superiority of a group of people based solely on race. That is the definition of racism. Systemic racism is the suggestion that you don't actually have to be conscious of your own racism. You don't have to be a racist. You don't have to have done anything racist. You don't have to be complicit in a quote-unquote racist policy that is directed specifically at subjugating people of a particular race. You don't have to do any of that. Systemic racism is the idea that any system that creates any inequality between races is in fact racist, and if you are complicit in that system, then even if you are not a racist, you are complicit in racism. Right? You're basically like a brown shirt in the Nazi system. Right? There are no good Germans, or if there are good Germans, then they are complicit in the Nazi system. The same thing is true of systematically racist and systemically racist systems. So systemic has now completely shifted the definition of racism to the point where you are now personally held responsible for systems, even if you yourself have not done anything wrong. Now, Thomas Sowell recently suggested we have now reached a point in American life where nobody is held responsible for the decisions they make, but everybody is held responsible for the decisions others make. And I think that that is basically correct. And this is the perspective taken up by the elitists. Because one of the beautiful things about being an elitist is that you have relieved yourself of individual responsibility by condemning the system, and now you get to reshape the entire system because you have condemned the system. And you also get to ignore the plight of individuals. You don't have to focus in on individuals because, again, focus on individuals places responsibility where it truly lies, with people making individual decisions. Focus on systems, especially free systems, tends to result in your ability to shirk your own responsibility for your own actions, and instead, you get to campaign against systems from which you can dissociate, which is a very self-esteem boosting way of viewing the world.